Good afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you happen to be. Welcome. I'm your moderator. If there are any issues that you're not hearing or there's any problems, please let me know. If I could introduce myself first, I'm Kathy Gannon. I'm a senior correspondent for the Association of Pakistan and Afghanistan, and I have been in the region almost as long as the refugees have been displaced due to war. I've been here more than 3 decades for Afghan refugees, many of them for 4 decades, and still trying to understand how they will get back home for many of them. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here. I have a little bit of details, if you don't mind. Just a little bit on your WebEx. So all the participants are on. You don't have to worry if there's any noise in the background. That's not a problem. Just the chat function between participants is also disabled, so you won't be able to chat with each other. So you'll have to listen to us, and there'll be no interventions from the floor. That was a rule that was laid out for me. I didn't make that rule, just to be clear. When it's your turn to speak, you'll take the cue. I'll introduce you, and then you just take your microphone off of mute, and we'll be happy to hear what you have to say. Now, I'll just give you a little brief background, which I'm sure you're already familiar with, but I'll give it to you anyway because I've been asked to. It's ahead of the 2020 funding conference in Geneva next week. This is happens every 4 years, and this is probably, for many, I think, probably likely to be the last of the funding. Afghanistan, as we all know, after 20 years, is still struggling with a poverty rate of 70% plus, and certainly there are issues that difficult issues to be dealt with, and security issues. This conference here is sort of to look at where the refugees who are desperate to get home, desperate in Afghanistan to find a sustainable way to survive, and this is all part of what this will be. The discussions here is how to get to that, and I'm going to introduce the UN High Commissioner, Mr. Filippo Grandi, and Mr. Grandi is just both the government senior to better understand the situation and better understand the needs going forward. So, Mr. I'll turn it over to you, sir. And you.
Sorry, I was having difficulty unmuting. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me, Kathy? I hope you can hear me. Yeah. All right, I'll begin. Well, look, thank you very much for your introduction. At this point, I'll speak more later, but at this point, really, this is an opportunity for me to welcome everybody to this side event. I don't know how we call this side event, side event. There's a lot around this conference that is being programmed, but I think it is a very good opportunity to introduce a subject, that of Afghan forced displacement, which is still very important, as you mentioned, very substantial. There's millions of Afghans that are not in their homes, either because they're displaced up inside their country, we say up to 4 million, or because they are still abroad, especially in the 2 countries that have hosted them for literally generations at this point, for 40 years, in Pakistan and Iran. And therefore, I think that in building towards the conference will have, and I'm very pleased, we'll have another official side event on Monday on return and reintegration as part of a broader discussion on these matters. So we'll talk more about that, but today we have a bit more time. We have time to hear from different actors. I'm very grateful, by the way, for these introductory remarks. I'd like to stress, very grateful to President Ashraf Ghani. I just met him a few days ago in Kabul. I'm very pleased and honored that he has accepted to record the video to introduce this meeting. We will hear that and we will watch this video, I understand, in a few minutes. And I'm also very grateful that the President of Pakistan, Arif Alvi, has agreed to do the same. Pakistan is, of course, a very important, together with Iran, one of the two key host countries of Afghan refugees. It is also one of the co-conveners of last year's Global Refugee Forum here in Geneva, which operationalized many of the commitments made the year before by the Global Compact. As you said, Kathy, I've just returned literally yesterday from Afghanistan, from a fairly extensive mission there. As you may know, I've also been associated with this country, not as much as you, but for many years, and spent a few years there some time back. And so I'm very attached to it. And I think it is important to, in spite of the enormous challenges that exist, that still exist, when you go there, as you do, you talk to the people, you talk to the women in particular, you see what colossal challenges are still ahead of the Afghan people to overcome. But I think the fact that this conference is coming is a good signal of staying the course on the part of the international community. We'll discuss that. We'll discuss that later. I'm very pleased. Last point I want to make by way of introduction, that we'll hear also today from diaspora representatives, from people that are abroad, are Afghans abroad, but have made contributions to the societies hosting them, and also have, as the president told me the other day, an enormous contribution, potential contribution to make to Afghanistan in the way forward. So it will be good that also they are associated with this effort to revitalize international support for the country. I'll speak more later, more systematically here. Really, mine is an initial welcome. And Kathy, thank you very much. And you personally for your own commitment to these complicated issues for so many years. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grandi. Now, as the High Commissioner said, we'll be having a series of videos from leaders, and the first one will be from the UN Secretary General. We have a pre-recorded video message. Mr. Antonio, yes, and so we'll have that first, so you can sit back and watch.
I send my warmest greetings to this high-level consultation. Afghanistan has been ravaged by conflict for more than half of the 75 years since the United Nations was established. The inter-Afghan negotiations are now providing a glimmer of hope. As opportunities for peace are tested and violence escalates, it's more important than ever that we walk side by side with the people of Afghanistan. The voluntary return in safety and dignity of Afghans who have been displaced, internally and across borders, is an important step towards building peace and stability. Millions of people have already returned to Afghanistan, but millions remain in exile, mostly in Pakistan and Iran. We must deliver on their legitimate right to return home through a dialogue focused on solutions. It is essential that refugees are fully included in Afghanistan's reconciliation, reconstruction, and development processes. Inclusion is key to building cohesive, resilient communities that can withstand shocks. I thank you for your participation in this high-level consultation and send you my best wishes for fruitful discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The next video, there'll be a series of videos by different people and leaders. And the next video that we're going to show will be a message from Afghan President Ashraf Ghani. Thank you so much.
In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. I would like to take this opportunity to extend my sincere gratitude to the honorable participant of today's consultation and convey my best wishes and regards to the head of state and representatives of participating international organizations. I would like to especially thank UNHCR and appreciate their cooperation in working closely with the Afghan government on returnee and repatriation issues over the years. The theme of today's consultation is building a future for all Afghans. This is a goal that requires us to think about our nation, living inside the country and as a global diaspora, beyond the war and forward towards peace, prosperity, and reintegration. 40 years of war has caused Afghanistan to become one of the top 3 countries producing almost half of the world's refugees. Millions of Afghans reside outside of the country, a majority of them in Iran and Pakistan, many living in situations of poverty, making a daily wage of below $2 a day. Internally, poverty is our central challenge and threat. I'm pleased, however, to share some good news. The latest survey just completed shows a reduction from 54.5% in 1395 or 2016 to 47.3% in 1399, i.e. 2020. When peace is achieved in Afghanistan, we anticipate that not only will conditions allow millions to return to their homeland, but that we will also be faced with a difficult task of reintegrating ex-Taliban fighters. This is a major undertaking, one that is a double-sided coin. If done carefully and thoughtfully, with good strategies and proper resources, Afghanistan will gain a huge advantage. But if overlooked or implemented in a rushed manner with bad strategies and poor resources, there is a risk that returnees and those being reintegrated could face further vulnerabilities, and the process could be a destabilizing one for Afghanistan. That is why we are taking this matter very seriously, and it has been a focus of this administration since 2014. A policy framework for returnees and IDPs was finalized in 2017 that integrated programs across government and took a whole of community approach to mitigate political risks of reallocating resources for returnees and IDP population. The High Migration Council, chaired by the Presidency, became the body for defining national policy and resolving issues of policy interpretation. The Displacement and Return Executive Committee brought together Afghan government leadership and the sector with UNAMA to oversee the implementation of the policy. Vice President Saleh is chairing this committee. Internally, good strategy requires a whole of state and whole of government focus. A model of growth that can ensure 9% sustained growth for a decade, relentless attention to implementation through national programs, commitment to participatory methods of design, planning, and implementation, and reliance on pragmatic solutions and reflective monitoring for learning through doing to encourage innovation. Internationally, the principle of voluntary return and reconceptualization of refugees as a diaspora and people on the move should become the focus of research and policy. Above all, we must act together to understand the human, cultural, economic, and social capital of the people, men and women, children, youth, and elders, to take into account in their reintegration and to work with and invest in the expansion of their capitals and capabilities. The peace process has again raised the urgency of returnees and reintegration in a new land. Thus, moving forward, we've incorporated the repatriation of refugees, returnees, and ex-combatant in every component of the second Afghanistan National Peace and Development Framework that will be presented at the upcoming Geneva conference, including state building, peace building, and market building. We've just restructured our budget, increasing the development budget by 3% through cutting the recurrent budget. to invest in capitals and capabilities and ensure balanced human, social, and spatial development. As national programs are the mechanism of linking policy through the budget to delivery, we are reviewing and restructuring all national programs to ensure the inclusion of reintegration of diaspora and empowerment of poor, women and youth, the three numerical majorities of our people. Harnessing of water to increase productivity of existing land and bringing an additional 1 million hectares under cultivation, expansion of pastoral, rural, and urban value chains and supply chains, transformation of our location into an Asian roundabout and an energy hub, implementing strategic development frameworks in our major cities, attracting international investment in our renewable energy to develop our mining sector, and other sectors are among the key measures that will get us to reach our goal of 9% sustainable growth by 2025. Regional connectivity and cooperation is critical to achieving these objectives, and we are delighted that Central Asia is looking south and South Asia is looking north, thereby becoming stakeholders in sustainable peace, sustainable development, and political stability within the constitutional framework of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. Meanwhile, we need help and a framework to avoid bad strategies, which is not absence of strategies, but relying on approaches that have failed time and again to create a virtuous circle between desirability, feasibility, and credibility. We are committed to working with our partners for an inclusive peace process that includes facilitating the voluntary return of refugees, as well as the reintegration of ex-combatants following a political settlement. Careful design and thoughtful execution will ensure that reintegration is used as another opportunity to build national unity, as opposed to a situation where limited resources yet again become a topic of division and conflict. My fellow Afghan men and women abroad have accumulated a wealth of human capital, skills and assets with which they can play a fundamental role in market building, reconstruction, and development in Afghanistan. We must see them as an asset to be mobilized and absorbed into society, to reinforce social cohesion within the strategic approach to peace building and state building. This will require substantial assistance and cohesion from the international community in coordination with the Afghan government, governments of Iran and Pakistan, with the Afghan people, both inside the country and among our diaspora. We ask for your consensus support in this effort.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, unfortunately, I wasn't able to see that video or hear it, but we'll go right into our next message video, and that's from Dr. Arif Alvi, the President of Pakistan.
It's indeed a pleasure to join the conference and consultations at a high level on building a future for all Afghans and return and reintegration of the refugees. I must commend the work done by the United Nations High Commission on Refugees, the present incumbent, Mr. Grandi, and his predecessor, Mr. Gutierrez. The UN Refugee Agency has had a very protracted and long role with the Afghan refugees. And for the last 30 or 40 years, Pakistan has been a host on a very sizable number of refugees. I think the opportunities which are coming across as far as peace and stability is concerned in Afghanistan, it's a very important and a golden period which we may be seeing. And Pakistan has played a full role in trying to establish the peace process. And I must congratulate the Afghans for coming together, and the Taliban and the government for coming together and moving towards a peace process which has its own dynamism of dividends in which the people of Afghanistan stand to gain. The worst affected country other than Afghanistan itself because of the war of the last 3 or 4 decades was Afghanistan, then Pakistan. And similarly, the benefits of peace in Afghanistan, the most affected country would be Afghanistan itself and its people, and secondarily Pakistan will stand to benefit. I believe that the Afghan refugees, Pakistan played a very significant role in hosting them, and there was no political command. There was never any voice within the country that the Afghan refugees should be sent back, other than with dignity and the possible capacity to be developed at the same time for incorporating them in Afghan society. For this, the development plans have to be on the ground. For this, at the same time, please do realize that the Afghan refugees here who have been here for 2 or 3 generations almost, generations meaning a 10-year or 15-year cycle, they've been here, they have learned a lot, they're entrepreneurial in their intent, and they will be going back to Afghanistan with a lot of skills which they have gathered within Pakistan. So the ability of Afghan society to quickly incorporate them is very important. Pakistan has set aside almost $1 billion to help the transition of Afghanistan from where it is today into the future, which is very beneficial, which will be beneficial for both countries. There are skills which can be taken back from help from Pakistan in rebuilding of Afghanistan. Pakistan and Afghanistan have the potential of becoming a geo-economic and very important geostrategic hub, allowing goods to move from Central Asia through Afghanistan into Pakistan and towards the sea, and vice versa. So I think the progress which is happening, I believe the Afghans have the final say, and they should have the final authority to implement on themselves whatever they believe politically and economically is their consensus regarding governance in their own country. Pakistan wishes them good luck. Pakistan ensures the fact that we, as good neighbors, we will try and help each other. We've always tried to keep that in mind. At the same time, we belong to a similar religious background. So cooperation in all aspects is very important. I thank you very much for establishing this conference and this consultation, because this is the peace building effort beyond the ending of war, coming of peace, and the peace to entrench peace within Afghan society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another video I didn't see, but I'm sure the message was complete. The next video you're going to be seeing is going to be a compilation, and this is a compilation of refugees and returning voices. Very important to listen to. So here it is.
PhD लेवल तक मैं यहीं पे पढ़ूंगी, फिर अफ़गानिस्तान जाके मैं यूनिवर्सिटीज़ में पढ़ाऊंगी वहाँ के यूथ को, ताकि वो भी एजुकेटेड हो जाए इस फील्ड में जिस तरह मैंने पढ़ा है, और हम लोग इकट्ठे यूनाइटेड हो जाए और इकट्ठे मिलके अफ़गानिस्तान के तामीर नस्ल नौ में अपना किरदार अदा कर सकें।
I feel any safety or peace there, then I would love to go there. I would love to work with my own people. They need so many doctors there, but the situation in Afghanistan, it all seems uncertain.
تقریبا د نوي کال ته رسېدلی نوي کال ته اوس نو دلته راغلي یو 4 کاله کېږي چې دلته راغلی اوس بیا په هرې مزدورۍ پوهېږو په هرې غریبۍ پوهېږو په دوکاندارۍ پوهېږو په هر شي حساب مو سر خلاص دی خو لیکن په لاس کې نن شی نشته نو زموږ لاسونه تړلي اوس بیا لکه دا لاسونه چې وتړي خو پیسه چې نه وي لاسونه تړلي
Well, I'm certainly glad I didn't miss that video because that was very good. So thank you very much for whomever put that together, that compilation. I think that was probably, in my mind anyway, certainly very important to see and probably more important to hear for everyone. So now that we have gone through the videos, we are going to start with our panel discussion. The way it's going to work, from what I've been given, is that I'll present questions to each in turn, and each in turn will have 3 to 4 minutes, or as long as you need to explain your positions. And we are going to begin with Mr. Grandi, the High Commissioner. And I've been, of course, because you have just been there, you have such a firsthand experience to speak to. But what I'd like to discuss, I mean, it's been 20 years. Refugees here in Pakistan, you know, some have been for 40 years, Iran. Their situation is quite desperate. They certainly, having gone back, some of them have returned back to as refugees because they weren't given anything. The promises were false. There's a great deal of after 20 years, discouragement and frustration by refugees. Sir, I'm wondering if you could address the challenges, but how do you move forward? It's been 20 years. For refugees, they're not as honored to hear the president of a country speak when they've gone back and listened to promises or gone because of promises, and then those promises haven't been fulfilled. So I'm just wondering, moving forward, sir, how do you see the challenges, and how do you meet the challenges, and how do you hold people in power accountable to do what they need to do? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Kathy, for this important question and for the privilege of opening this discussion. Let me put a little bit things in perspective also on the strength of this visit that I have just concluded. My organization has been with Afghans for 41 years now, through thick and thin. You know, in times of exile, in times of return, there's been several, as you noticed, not maybe completely sustainable, but it's been a long and complex history. If you look at displacement today, 4 million inside the country, estimated, of course, and then several million in neighboring countries. In spite of all the return waves, we still have almost 1 million registered refugees in Iran, over 1 million in Pakistan, plus all those that are not registered and also often struggle in those countries. So this is, as the president said in his video, this is one of the largest forced, or let's say human displacement situations in the world, up there with the most critical ones. And unfortunately, I want to add even to your question, this is growing. Last year alone, not last year, this year alone, there's been almost 300,000 new forcibly displaced people inside the country, largely because of the rising levels of violence. On the other hand, I do believe, and having been there in the last few days, I do believe that in spite of all these challenges, the combination of talks, talks are always complex, peace talks are always complex, but they require an enormous amount of patience and time to produce results. But the combination of that, and with this conference that is going to happen next week, which I'm sure we will witness again a renewed commitment of the international community to help Afghanistan. And what I have heard from the government on the ground, we heard some of it from President Ashraf Ghani a few minutes ago. There's a combination of factors that could, if suitably handled, managed, and conducted, create opportunities to reduce that colossal displacement. I also hope fervently that displacement, the fact that so many millions of Afghans are not at home, will be a consideration in the peace discussion and in the international support discussion. This cannot be a footnote. This has to be an essential piece of the puzzle. If you don't solve displacement, you don't reach peace, and not all Afghans will have a way to stability and prosperities. Now, of course, in order for this to be meaningful and sustainable, you're quite right. I was in Afghanistan in the early part of this century when 3 million people went back, but we had only humanitarian assistance to give. And the security, which was fairly good in the beginning, as you certainly know, quickly deteriorated. Now we need to look at these two aspects, security and prosperity and development. So the peace process has to be meaningful in whatever outcome it produces. In particular, I would say from my perspective, it has to ensure whatever outcome it has in the end, if it reaches one, it has to achieve a context, a situation in which the rights of all Afghans are preserved, in which many of the achievements of the past 20 years, because there's been achievements, those achievements are upheld. In particular, I give you a couple of examples. Women's rights, in particular, equitable access to services by all Afghans, irrespective of gender. These are the challenges that Afghan people told me about. This is what they're worried about. If this is not achieved, that peace process will not be a factor of peace, but also of return. And of course, also the current spike of violence has to cease. This is the most phenomenal deterrent to return and cause of displacement. And the international community has to stay the course. We've asked the host countries, Pakistan and Iran, to be patient for 40 years. We're telling Afghans to be patient and wait for more. But I think the international community also, has responsibility and stakes, has to be patient and continue to stay the course. And I hope that Geneva will do that. Moving forward, I would say, number one, as always in Afghanistan, we need to be ready for different scenarios. We need to be ready. I am afraid I have to
Thank you so much. I'm sorry, Mr. Grande, we lost you for the last part of your response, and thank you so much for for what you said. I'd certainly like to get back to some of what you said in terms of are all sides committed to peace, including both in Kabul and outside, and where how you can be certain that the guarantees that are given are actually met, you know, in terms of staying the course, so that Afghan refugees who have gone back and have run into difficulties because of overwhelming corruption and money being lost. So I'd like to talk more about that in terms of, and certainly, of course, women's rights that have been gained, but certainly, you know, there is a far way to go, and so. But I appreciate very much you all of what you said, and now we're going to go, and this is I'm really looking forward to hearing from Mr. Rahmani, and Mr. Rahmani is the Chancellor and President of Cardan University. My goodness, you know, the education in Afghanistan, and Mr. Rahmani represents the private sector. So I think there's a lot of interesting questions for Mr. Rahmani. I'd be very interested to hear what are your greatest needs to move forward. Certainly education in Afghanistan this year, just in the last few months, has suffered with attacks by at least in this case, they seem to have been taken by the Islamic State. So I'm a representative of the private sector, the education. How difficult is it to do business? What do you need? What are your greatest needs going forward? And what would you like the international community to do to help get those needs in place or met for you?
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Katie. First, I would love to start with saying that I used to live as a refugee in Pakistan for over a decade, and I can somewhat relate to the challenges and ambitions of Afghan refugees and returnees. I returned to Kabul in 2002 in a country where war had virtually taken everything from Afghans. Their lives, the livelihoods, the dreams, and above all, the most precious assets that we had, our educated and skilled people. In 2002, when I returned back to Afghanistan, in the midst of this physical and intellectual devastation, I chose to focus on education as the most vital contribution to building Afghanistan's future. And I started Cardan University in 2002 as a very small institution. It was very, very small at that time. I started with only 11 students and only a $300 investment in that. And since then, it has become one of the most prestigious and well-known higher education institutions in Afghanistan. I managed to get it registered and chartered with the Ministry of Higher Education in 2006 as the first private university in Afghanistan. And since then, we have been training thousands of young Afghan people and trying to give them hope and inspire them and guide them for their future and careers. It has been a wonderful journey. I have had this opportunity to be with these beautiful, amazing, inspiring, and hopeful people from 3 years old up until different ages, because right now we are also running Cardan kindergarten as well as Cardan schools. So we have a preschool, we have a primary school as well as a secondary school. And all this has given me an opportunity to engage with Afghan youth and get an opportunity to understand what are their feelings and how they are reacting to different situations. And it's been, as I said before, a wonderful journey. they keep inspiring us despite all the challenges around here in Afghanistan. I feel extremely happy and accomplished when we see them that they get to achieve their goals, and they get to make something out of their life, and they get to contribute to the economy of the country. As you mentioned, the working in Afghanistan, anywhere, it can be tough, it can be challenging, especially in education. But despite all these challenges, I really find it rewarding because I honestly, truly believe that education is the only way forward, especially in making peace, in sustaining peace, and in developing and contributing to the prosperity of Afghanistan. I strongly believe that investment in quality education must be sustained. The returns on investment in education exceeds any other type of investment. And I think it gives life skills and hope to young people, which then they can contribute to socioeconomic development that can then consolidate the building blocks of the sustainable peace. I really urge all the, I really think that all the international partners to Afghanistan should consider education and keep investing in education, because it is the only way forward in giving hope to people, and through that sustaining peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rahmani. I really appreciate it. And my goodness, the work you're doing in terms of education, as you said, is just so important. And there's such a desire among Afghan youth for education. And our next, we're now going to go to Mr. Gareth Bailey, and he's the director of South Asia and Afghanistan at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, and the Prime Minister's Special Representative to Afghanistan and to Pakistan. Thank you very much, Mr. Bailey. I could ask you, you certainly, it's been 20 years, just in terms of assistance to Afghanistan and how to ensure that it gets to people who need it. It's been 20 years, billions of dollars have been pledged and given to Afghanistan, yet you have a poverty rate of 70%. Of course, that's COVID related up to 70, but pre-COVID, it was 54% of Afghans live on $1.14 a day. There's certainly, when you talk to ordinary Afghans, when you're just going out, there certainly is a great deal of frustration among them that so much money has come and they don't see that it's changed their lives, or that it's getting to them. And how is there anything thinking out of the box thinking coming from the international community, coming from the UK, that would say, how do you audit the money? How do you get the money to people who need it? How do you ensure that the money is not lost to corruption? My goodness, even the COVID money we discovered had not reached, had been lost to some corruption. So if I could ask you, if you could sort of address certainly UK and others are doing a great deal, but how do you, is there any out of the box thinking to try to get it to the people who need it? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Kathy. Can I just check that you can hear me okay? Just doing a sound check before
I can hear you.
You can. Great. Yeah. Lovely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And just may I say, it's a super honor and a privilege to be here with you all today. You've got an inspiring panel here, and I feel particularly humbled to follow Mr. Rahmani, who's actually lived what we are discussing today. I'll try and answer that question as best I can in my remarks, but can I just say maybe firstly offer a word of tribute and analyze the situation more broadly. I was asked to say a little bit about what we're doing. I'll try and avoid that being kind of flag waving exercise and maybe offer a few conclusions. In terms of tribute, I mean, I think the first and obvious thing to do is to pay tribute to the Afghan refugees and internally displaced persons themselves. I thought the video, like you, was incredibly inspiring, and it showed Afghan refugees and internally displaced people making every day, day in, day out, meaningful livelihood choices, and indeed making their host countries flourish and more successful. I think that's where Mr. Rahmani is coming from. And it would be an omission for me not to pay tribute also to host countries, particularly Pakistan and Iran. Together, I think they host nearly 90% of Afghan refugees. So although we have in Europe a refugee population of Afghans, the real task here is borne by Pakistan and Iran. And then finally, I just want to pay tribute to UNHCR, Mr. Grandi, and indeed you for bringing this panel together. Really, this is a sign of selfless dedication to the welfare and dignity of refugees. An observation as I turn to a bit of an analysis is simply that it's too easy when we discuss these issues to miss in the principle of returns the phrase voluntary, safe and dignified. And returns for the UK is not a meaningful goal if you don't have that sense of voluntary, safe and dignified attached, those three important words attached to the sense of return. So analytically, I think we look at it in terms of three sets of issues. Firstly, the political commitment to effect this voluntary, safe and dignified return. That seems to be absolutely there. And only yesterday, Prime Minister Khan and President Ghani affirmed their commitment to returns, and that refugees was in the refugee situation was set out in their joint vision declaration. So that's, I think, always there 20 years in. The political commitment is there. The tripartite agreement of 2002-3, I think it was, is there as our basis. So we should have no concerns there. And then secondly, I think there are technical aspects to this, and we have equally, I think we've got a volume of work there which has absolutely set out our commitments internationally to mechanisms and instruments to make returns happen and make them happen well in terms of Afghanistan and Pakistan. That goes through the action plan that they have together for peace and solidarity. And again, technically, I think we have really no issues to be concerned about. But then to your question about really, so, 19, 20 years on or 40 years on, choose your time frame, why have we still got these levels of both insecurity and indeed a lack of access to aid, notwithstanding tremendous amount being put in? Well, I think, we're into this third category of analytical issues, which is the practical aspects. People are acutely focused now on the Afghanistan peace negotiations and on the ultimately a reduction in violence, which leads straight away to substantive negotiations out of Doha, not simply preliminary talks, and to, as soon as we possibly can, get a ceasefire agreed as a priority. And if you have that, then you have a security situation which no longer deters potential returnees and gives the humanitarian community the certainty and surety they have to be able to access the whole country and not just those parts that are easier achieved. I mean, we saw in the video the woman doctor interviewed, and she's talking about uncertainty, she's talking about anxiety, and you yourself have talked about discouragement and frustration. And ultimately, I mean, we could try through any number of technical fixes to see about improving and refining the aid delivery model that we have today in Afghanistan. But 20 years in, I think really there's not much more that humanitarian professionals can do to refine the model. It's all come down to how can we actually get a peace process that is delivering security on the ground for Afghan refugees. There's also, if I may, and I'm taking up a little bit of time here, but there's also there are just some aspects I think that are worth scrutinizing. Many Afghans were born in Pakistan and Iran. They're very well integrated. There's an issue there about, as the video said, not necessarily recognizing a country that they would be returning to. Many Afghans live in urban areas which in Afghanistan are heavily populated, very limited housing stock. And as President Ghani was touching on, there is a whole raft of issues about reform and absorption capacity, land rights, access to services, and so on and so forth. So, all of that to say that your question is not easily answered. But if Mr. Grandi had one remark, I think, for us all to listen to and to pay heed to, it was this idea of staying the course. We're 19 years now into this latest phase of our commitment to Afghanistan. It's as hard as it's ever been, but we will continue to play our part going forward. And can I just make a plug here, because you mentioned corruption and anti-corruption. That is at the heart of things, because you don't want to see aid diversion and you want to be able to fix that. And the UK will be hosting on Monday an anti-corruption event, which will be linked to exactly the sorts of issues that are being discussed today. So I'll leave it there and thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bailey, and that's very interesting, and also that we'll be dealing with it, and there's certainly so much that is going on, and I appreciate very much you explaining that. We're now going to go to Lisa Piper, and Lisa is a director for ACBAR. ACBAR is the agency coordinating body for Afghan relief and development. It has been very active in Afghanistan for many decades. It works with the national and international NGOs and represents a wide variety of people working in Afghanistan in different parts of the country. And I'm wondering, Lisa, if we could talk a little bit about what you're doing, some of the issues that ACBAR has come across in terms of even the different organizations and working together, local organizations, international organizations, and what do you see as maybe as needed to move it forward, a better working relationship or a more cohesive one?
Thank you very much. And I'd like to also say thank you for the invitation to be part of this panel. We are a member of civil society as ACBAR, but as we all know, civil society is very broad. ACBAR has 154 members. I believe next month we will well surpass 160 members. But notably, we have both international NGOs and national NGOs as our members. And so often we see international NGOs directly deliver programs in support of returnees and reintegration. Our national members, however, we see that their integrations are not so much based on status, meaning they don't necessarily specific target returnees or IDPs, but it's more needs-based. So what this means is that our national NGOs work within displacement-affected communities that include host communities and our displaced populations and returnees. So there's a really strong understanding by our national NGO colleagues, and when I say national, I mean local and regional and national, about the needs and the challenges of communities, as well as the importance of reintegration and how to do that, how to embrace returns in communities, and especially how to avoid conflict and resistance to reintegration. So regarding civil society and many of civil society members' priorities for reintegration, durable solutions for reintegration, it reflects the needs and priorities of the displaced populations and the returnees. So this includes, for example, access to education for children and youth. So returnees are adamant that their children are able to benefit from an education so that they have a better future in Afghanistan. Meaningful education involves years of support. One-year projects only touch the surface. Longer-term support for a smooth transition from emergency and humanitarian responses to development interventions so that schools can meet demand, that teachers, and particularly female teachers, are properly trained and retained so that students can attain a quality education. All of this is crucial within an environment of insecurity, increasing conflict, access challenges, now exacerbated by COVID-19 and the months-long and poverty, with all of the negative coping mechanisms that come with these challenges. That means school dropouts, child labor, early forced marriage. Another key priority for civil society is access to jobs and livelihoods where people earn a living wage and work in decent conditions. Short-term vocational training, which has value, it's welcome, it does not necessarily mean returnees will go on to secure a stable income to support their families and rebuild their lives in Afghanistan. Much of the vocational training offered is for a market that is already saturated. For women, they often reinforce cultural, gender-based, and social limitations. There's a grave need for all stakeholders, including the government of Afghanistan, the international community, and civil society, to ensure that any long-term strategies, action plans, and interventions are based on thorough market assessments, include required skills building, and creative thinking outside of the box for small and medium enterprise business development support. It's also important to remember that returnees to Afghanistan are not necessarily a drain on society or causes of increasing poverty in Afghanistan. They can offer opportunities for self-reliance. Many returnees in host communities sent their children to formal schools and universities, learning transferable skills. Upon return, they are equipped to contribute to Afghanistan's developing economy. Afghanistan has an opportunity to harness their skills and experience, but only if it is able to thoughtfully plan and take action through a comprehensive approach, potentially through frameworks such as the Afghanistan National Peace and Development Framework and corresponding prioritized action plans, but both at national and provincial levels. Any reintegration planning must address and be tailored to specific needs of returnees, both men and women. This includes former refugees, economic migrants, and former fighters. Regarding the international community, it is important to support work already developed and delivered by civil society in Afghanistan, Iran, and Pakistan to build on good practices that have brought results, as well as learn from past experiences to improve on what needs to be improved. National community needs to tap into the knowledge and experience civil society has gained on the ground, particularly our national NGO colleagues, and recognize them as valuable actors and partners that will take the national goals and international support to the communities, and likewise share the needs and perceptions of communities with donors and with the government of Afghanistan. Civil society must be considered a significant partner in the upcoming period of the Afghanistan National Peace and Development Framework throughout all of the three pillars of state building, peace building, and market building. Civil society's work must be facilitated so that we can engage in a principled manner according to the principles of independence, impartiality, and neutrality. The work envisaged in this framework cannot be delivered by the government of Afghanistan and the private sector alone. Because of the numerous returnees who find themselves living in informal settlements or having lost title to their lands, there is a need for commitment to identifying and addressing barriers to the government's complicated land allocation scheme and its implementation that affects internally displaced populations and returnees' ability to access the lands they are entitled to. In addition, the solution strategy for Afghan refugees would be richer, more relevant, and impactful if it secures a stronger, more prominent and clearer role for civil society. Regional connection and cooperation among civil society within the signatory countries of the SSAR would only serve to make the journey back from refugee status to Afghanistan not only better, but more durable. No returnee should be coming back to Afghanistan only to find themselves becoming internally displaced in their country of origin, just because the opportunities and conditions are not conducive to reestablish their lives at home. On behalf of ACBAR and all of our members, we are ready to facilitate more cooperation among partners to the SSAR and civil society in Afghanistan and beyond. On a personal note, I first came to Afghanistan in 2004, and the hope was tangible in the air. And over the years, I have seen that hope being eroded. So after decades of interventions, the upcoming peace talks, there's an opportunity for all of us to really learn interventions and apply those lessons learned so that interventions are meaningful and Afghanistan becomes self-reliant, and that the world sees Afghanistan the way most of us who keep coming back to Afghanistan see it, where it is a beautiful country and people are warm and gracious. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I really appreciate it. Wow, you covered a lot. You went through a lot, and I particularly was taken by what you said, having at the end your personal note, having first come to Afghanistan in 1987. So and certainly seeing over these last 20 years that hope, and as you so rightly say. We have the High Commissioner back, so that's really wonderful. I don't know, High Commissioner, would you like to finish with your comment, because we lost the last part?
Maybe, Kathy, first of all, deep apologies. I really don't know what happened. We've been doing this for 8 months, but today it happened. And I'm at home, so it's a bit more complicated. Second, I think at this point, you get going. I've listened to Lisa's very good intervention. Get going, and I'll use my slot at the end to complete what I wanted to do, if that's all right, in the interest of time. Thank you. Go ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. I just wanted to give you the opportunity, though. But thank you. Yes, I'm constantly having my internet interrupted. But so then next we're going to go to Mrs. Henrietta Guy, and Henrietta is the Director for People and Peace, Directorate General for Development and Cooperation of the European Commission. The European Union is a big contributor to Afghanistan, and it's really an important partner in helping Afghanistan and moving Afghanistan forward. I would like very much to hear what Ms. Geiger has to say about what the European Union is doing. But I don't mean to keep harping on this, but you've had 20 years to work on how to get assistance to Afghanistan and to Afghans, and I guess you talk about not only sustained and increased their support over the years. I guess security, of course, is an issue. But when you talk to Afghans, while security is an issue, in many cases it's not their greatest issue. Their greatest issue is, and I think the refugee compilation spoke to it too. 4 years, we haven't been back 4 years, haven't received anything, uncertainty. And I guess as the European Union, I'd like to hear your programs, but I'd also like to talk a little bit about, if you could, about what you would like to see in how aid is delivered and how to try and increase Afghans' confidence that they will get what they need, that the assistance that they need, and some hope back. Thank you so much. Big question.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everybody. Let me start by warmly thanking UNHCR and especially High Commissioner Grandi for organizing this high-level consultation. So what we discuss today can come into and inform the exchanges at next week's Geneva conference. And to show how important that conference is for us, the EU will be represented by several commissioners next week. So we highly appreciate the joint work of UNHCR, Afghanistan, Iran, and Pakistan in seeking durable solutions for Afghan refugees and returnees. And I want to praise here, especially Iran and Pakistan, for their generosity towards the Afghan refugees that they're hosting, particularly for allowing labor market access and access to services such as health and education. This is crucial. And I think that it's very important to give public recognition of this essential solidarity. The citizens in the whole world need to know this. We have tried to do that also through the compact that we did last year together. For me, this is key to show who is really carrying the burden, who are the host communities that deserve all our support, and really to show that they are essential in the solution. So I will do whatever it takes to continuously put that message across, and also to make sure that the host communities get the means they need to do this essential work. So for the EU, addressing the challenges of migration and forced displacement, this will continue to be a key aspect of our international partnership worldwide. And this is all the more important because we are now starting a new financing cycle of 7 years. So we're just starting to program our aid. And that's why at the moment it's so important that the European Commission has proposed a new EU pact on migration and asylum. And that pact has a very important external dimension, with an approach tailored to the various challenges of migration, including irregular movements and forced displacement. Of course, this is highly relevant to the Afghan displacement crisis and its long-lasting implications on neighboring countries. And I would like to say that we, the development arm of the Commission, made very sure that the idea of supporting host communities, of addressing the root causes, and of sustainable reintegration is very well placed in that new pact. So in line with the solution strategy for Afghan refugees, the EU is supporting the inclusive protection and equal access to service delivery and employment for Afghans and their host communities in Afghanistan, Iran, and Pakistan. And together with our partners, we aim to strengthen the self-reliance and resilience of Afghans on the move, both in Afghanistan and abroad. So as a previous speaker said, so the displaced are not only seen as a burden, but so that they are enabled to become self-reliant and to become an asset for their host community. And then that is a big game changer. So you were saying, how can we deliver our aid more effectively, and how can we rebuild the confidence? This is exactly that. So we have to work with the communities in an integrated approach, because I was working after the Guatemala peace process very much on the implementation and the reintegration of the millions of displaced, including fighters. And what is key is that the community understands, and that the community is not starting with jealousy, what is given to the returnees, and so that there are no animosities built up. So this is something that is key for any type of sustainable reintegration, to get that right. We want to do our bit to facilitate the effective and sustainable reintegration with the we learned in the past decades in other contexts. And since 2016, the EU has provided over 600 million of humanitarian and development assistance in support of the most vulnerable refugee and host communities in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. And you can be sure that we'll continue the support in that respect. And this support is coming on top of our bilateral cooperation with the three countries, which amounts to more than 2 billion euros since 2014 and contributes to tackle the root causes of migration and forced displacement. The root causes is another key in ensuring effective aid delivery. If we're not looking at the root causes, we can pump as much money into a situation as we want, and we will not be able to have a lasting change. So the peace process is one of the means of addressing the root causes, but I will come to that in a moment. I just wanted to tell you that we also made available very substantial additional funds to alleviate the health and socio-economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has affected everybody, but those most vulnerable, including internally displaced, and migrants and refugees, are the ones that are hardest hit. So we have to make especially sure that no one is left behind here. So a word on the peace negotiations, the intra-Afghan peace negotiations, which were launched on 12 September. We consider this a historic and unique opportunity to lay the foundations for an inclusive and cohesive society. And it gives us, not only the Afghans, but also the world community, a beacon of hope and light in these dark times. But as Mr. Grandi pointed out, if the peace agreement is not addressing the root causes of the conflict, no sustainable peace is possible. So this is really an all-out effort of the entire society to look in a very critical and maybe also very painful process at what went wrong and to be sincere about getting it right. And this is not an easy process, and it takes a long time. But if the first step is not taken, we will not get anywhere. So, and this, of course, is key for the sustainable reintegration, because what can be done in reintegration if there's no peace, if there's no foundation for that allows a minimum of confidence for those returning, that they can build up a livelihood. So our experience is teaching us that successful reintegration is only possible through an integrated approach. So looking at the individual needs, but also the community needs, and addressing the structural challenges. So this implies support, providing concrete support and promoting reforms that can open opportunities for jobs, income-generating initiatives, access to key services, including education and health. And education, we fully agree with what Mr. Amani and Ms. Piper said before. Education is really the key. It's the highest return on investment, and maybe the fastest way of equipping returnees, refugees, displaced with the tools to attain some self-reliance. And education, we have to look at it also in non-conventional terms. So the sort of traditional way of providing education may not work. We have to look at flexible schemes where also the young people can build on different modules and add on to these things in a flexible way, and that they can carry on in case they need to move. So there we have to be creative and innovative, and especially now, education is the hardest hit sector by COVID-19. And we just had a high-level conference on education with education ministers around the world. And the shocking fact is that never in her world history have there been more children out of school than now, not even in the 2 world wars. So this is, if we're not careful, this produces a lost generation, and we will all have to pay the debt later on for this. So what we said is that we are, as the EU, advocating very strongly for the Afghanistan Partnership Framework and the Afghanistan National Peace and Development Framework to provide that sort of structure to have a sustainable inclusion of returnees and IDPs. Now, both Mr. Gandhi and Lisa Piper were talking about the role of women, and I cannot overemphasize that enough. Rights of women is one thing on paper, but the active part to allow the active participation of women in public life, including the peace process, is key. And there are still far too few, and in many peace processes, no women involved. And this, I would say, is setting it up for failure. This has to be an inclusive peace process, and women have to be part of it and at the table. So maybe a last point. It's not enough to look only at Afghanistan. We have to strengthen regional cooperation during and after the peace process. So the neighboring countries have to be part of the solution. And you can count on our support in this regard. We want to be a responsible partner in support of this process. And with this in mind, I'm honored to inform you that the EU has accepted the invitation by UNHCR to chair the core group of the Refugee Support Platform in 2021. We look forward to working with all members and stakeholders of the support platform in a genuine spirit of partnership and solidarity. And we will promote sustained dialogue and coordination and greater coherence among humanitarian and development investment. So I wish to conclude in reiterating the EU's strong commitment to address the situation of Afghan refugees, returnees, and their host communities in Afghanistan, Iran, and Pakistan. Many thanks.
Many, many thanks to you, Henrietta. So much of what you said was so important and a little bit breathtaking because you covered a lot and you covered it so well. Between you and Lisa, it really shows why women have to be much more active in everything. And certainly you make the point about the peace process. But in terms of even just pushing it among the Afghan government, where they haven't passed the elimination of violence, and sadly, even after 20 years, the situation. So speaking for that and education and everything that you mentioned, the complexities of reintegration, the jealousies. I mean, you just covered so much. It was really wonderful. It was so thank you so much. And now we're going to go to Mr. Antonio Vittorio, who's director of the International Organization for Migration. And the IOM does so much. I mean, the IOM has been working with, I think, coming back from Iran, just this year alone has been something like 150,000 refugees have returned from Iran alone to Afghanistan, not so many from Pakistan. Afghans made up the largest refugee population, outstripping Syria, going to Europe in 2019. That's after 20 years and billions of dollars. So there's some real issues of going forward in dealing with Afghanistan and how to move things forward. So, Mr. Vittorio, I would really Vittorino, I apologize, Mr. Vittorino, very much. But if you could explain a little bit of the work that you're doing and the difficulties with so many refugees returning from Iran, with so many trying to leave, Mr. Vittorino, could you speak to all of that? Thank you so much.
You managed to listen to me? Okay, sorry. First, thank Filippo Grandi and the High Commissioner for IOM to be attending this high-level consultation. Secondly, to express to all of you that so much has already been said that I do not have too much to add, except that really we speak a lot in the UN system and in the international community about a very famous nexus: humanitarian, development, and peace. And I think that it is in the interest of the Afghan people, of the neighboring countries, and of the entire international community that Afghan can be a success story of the nexus. But a lot will depend how we translate the nexus into reality. IOM has a large operation, as you have said, in Afghanistan. We deal with Afghan diaspora a little bit everywhere in the world. This year, only this year, 44% of those who arrived in the Greek islands are from Afghanistan. There is a large number of Afghan migrants in Europe, and there is a trend to return to Afghanistan if the peace process is successful. I think that nobody could speak more eloquently than the young doctor that has been speaking in the UNHCR video. She said very clearly, I want to go back. I want to give my contribution to my country because I have the skills that can make a difference. But due to the uncertainty about the future of the peace process, she's hesitant. And definitely, I believe that the more successful will be the peace process, and that's a key political issue, the more trend will be for the returnees to return back to Afghanistan. Those are two elements that mutually reinforce. But we should ask ourselves, what are the prerequisites for success in the peace process? And how can returnees contribute to that success? And I think that there are 3 points from my side. The first one is probably the most challenging one. It's a very key word: reconciliation. Reconciliation. A peace process is a process of reconciliation, of different parties, different understandings about the past, and trying to build a common will about the future. And those who have endured, the refugees, the migrants, the diaspora, who have endured the years of the suffering and they have left the country, they can give a contribution to establish the bridges of political dialogue to make reconciliation a reality. Second stream, you cannot persuade people to engage if you do not give them something which is resumed in one word: hope. And hope is not just an abstract concept. It needs to be translated into reality and means very easily education opportunities, jobs, and engagement in the society. Hope means that you create the conditions for development. And last stream, the third one. I think President Ghani was very clear on that. In order to succeed in the reconstruction of the country, you need to look to the country in its diversity. And diversity means there is a reality for the urban areas and there is a reality for the rural areas. And the reintegration of returnees, refugees, migrants needs to be tailor-made to the specificity of the environment where they are returning to. And definitely, I do believe that community stabilization is a key tool to succeed in the peace process, which will require the engagement of local leaders, which will require the engagement of women at local level, and which will require the engagement of the civil society. And that's where probably IOM can play a role. We are quite used to deal with community stabilization, transition and recovery projects, trying to build mutual trust and confidence at the local level. And that is the best contribution we can give to a successful peace process in Afghanistan that we all are wishing for. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Vitorino. And made some very good points, and certainly the whole hope is a big one, and as Lisa pointed out, it certainly has been dwindling in Afghanistan. So that's certainly something to look at, for the international community to really look at is why, certainly not all tied toward security and peace. There's a number of issues. So that's very interesting, and thank you so much. Now, which I'm very excited about, is we're going to hear from the Deputy Governor of Bamiyan Province. We love Bamiyan Province, which is absolutely spectacular and gorgeous. And Latifa Mohsini will speak on can talk to your experience. You came from Iran. Certainly this year, there's been, as I was saying, over 120,000 have come back. A lot of it because of the situation in Iran as well, sadly, with the economy. But if you could speak to Ms. Mohsini, if you could talk a little bit about, your experiences, but also looking forward, as a woman, and certainly everyone says women have to participate in the peace process, absolutely. But after 20 years, and yes, certainly strides have been made, but as I was saying, the Violence Against Women bill couldn't be passed. Last year, the index put Afghanistan as one of the worst places in the world to be a woman, second only to Syria, and that was an index out of Georgetown. Certainly, violence against women, early marriages, all these things are still, after 20 years, the movement maybe isn't as quick as people think. So I'm very excited to hear from you and love Bamiyan.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me? Do you hear me? Okay. It is a great honor to participate at this conference. I would like to thank everybody involved in organizing this very important event. I'm Latifa Mohsini, 35 years old. My family left Afghanistan more than 30 years ago, and I spent my teenage and young ages in Iran in refugee, and had a chance to graduate from University of Tehran in master's degree in tourism planning. Like other Afghan refugees in Iran, there were a lot of challenges and also opportunities. Challenges like we didn't not have the right to have a job according to our talent and proficiency, or for a period of time, we did not have the right of having high-level education. But I was lucky because of agreement between Afghanistan and Iran government at that time. I had higher education with personal payment and arrangement. After finishing my education, I always think about coming back to my beloved country, but didn't know that be able to find a right job, or is there any job for me as an Afghan returnee? Then I found out about IOM and Return Qualified Afghans program, and helped me to return and start my career and life journey in Afghanistan, and then other job experiences until I'm here as a Deputy Governor of Bamyan in Social Affairs, starting around 2 years ago, and also a volunteer lecturer in University of Bamyan. A returnee, when come back to Afghanistan, faces with problems, for example, challenges in security, job opportunities, and access to education. I would like to call on international community to continue their great support to the Afghan returnees in their reintegration activities for their sustainable life. In my opinion, we need to invest more and return skilled and educated refugees and make opportunity for them on large regional projects and in government key structures with considering local issues and also with coordination of host countries of Pakistan and Iran. As you know, we are in the historical time of peace talk process. And once again, I would like to call on international community to support the Afghan government in this peace talk for a sustainable peace, so we have a stable security all over Afghanistan, that everyone come back to their cities and villages. And support Afghanistan government for making opportunity for return Afghans refugees to their country. I would like to thank UNHCR for providing opportunity of voluntary return to Afghan refugees who return to their country in safety and dignity. At the end, I want to thank all countries and international community who helped my country to try to have stability and sustainable peace. Thank you very much.
Well, I, for one, want to thank you for all that you do, and for all the refugees who have come back, and for all the Afghans like you who do so much and every day that you move forward and you make everything a little bit better for your country. So I really think you're the one that deserves the thanks. So I, for one, want to, on behalf of everybody, say thank you to you. So, and now I would like to, for our next panelist, I would like to go to Dr. Wahid Aryan. And Dr. Wahid is a doctor and radiologist, British doctor and radiologist, and former Afghan refugee. And Dr. Aryan, you're going to speak to the importance and I think Ms. Musini also touched on this about the need for the educated and the skilled professionals to return to Afghanistan, and if I could ask you, I'd like you to speak to that. But if I could also ask you, Dr. Aryan, if you could also speak to for people to come back, what's the conditions that you think is conducive and to help encourage and what they need, and why after 20 years those conditions aren't there?
Thank you very much, Kathy. I'll just check my sound. Can you hear me? Okay.
Sorry. So you.
Could you hear me? Okay. So dear UNHCR, Dear Commissioner, Excellence, distinguished guests, it's a great honor for me to be speaking as a panelist. I was a former radiologist, and now I work as an emergency medicine physician in the National Health Service UK. I'm also a digital health expert with the World Health Organization, and also the founder of Aryan Heal, an international nonprofit that operates in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, in Africa, and India. But before all this, like many other Afghan refugees, I was a refugee myself multiple times. It started when I was born in Afghanistan in 1983 during the Afghan-Soviet conflict, because of which we had to move and hide in cellars from the rockets and the ships that were coming at us. After 5 years, we moved to Pakistan. In 1988, we resided in a refugee camp for about 2.5 years, and that's where I contracted tuberculosis and malaria. and suffered from horrible conditions in the camp. But actually, those conditions did inspire me to become a doctor in the first place. When we returned back to Afghanistan, the civil war broke out, as you all know, and because of that, people had to move to different parts of the country again for their own safety. So that was the internal displacement. And this is actually the journey of millions of other Afghan refugees that I'm trying to summarize. And finally, in 1999, I left Afghanistan as a child alone, a 15-year-old, came to the UK again as a refugee. I came in with about $100 in my pocket and no family or formal education. But I did come with my dreams that one day I will become educated and I will try to give back to my country, to heal Afghans and to heal my own family. Despite having nothing, I did have the tremendous resilience that the war gave me and never gave up. And that enabled me to get into Cambridge University, to Harvard, and to Imperial College in London, and finally a doctorate in 2010. And I founded the Arian Tally Heal charity in 2015. Important points I'd like to bring your attention to. Our distinguished guests have discussed their challenges, the opportunities, the processes very well. But what I would like to talk about is the potential and the contribution of refugees on national and international scale. First of all, investment in refugees is not only a long-term investment, but an immediate investment in their unique talents and in their resilience. We all strive to achieve our potential the best we can, and then using every opportunity, we try to give back to our host communities, and also we give back to our countries of origin. So I've briefly given an example of my own life, but there are millions of other examples in Pakistan and Iran, in Saudi Arabia, in the UK and US and worldwide. And secondly, investment in refugees is an investment in innovation, which is actually our collective present and our collective future. Because of the unique and diverse experiences that refugees go through, they become very unique problem solvers. And this is a point to consider. And because of that, they actually give back to their host communities and their countries of origin. We've already known that the vaccine that has come, it's actually the first vaccine that was announced. The migrants coming were from their Turkish origin in the first place. Another example is our non-profit organization, Arian Tally Heals, which is basically a system through which volunteer specialists in the UK, in the US, Canada, and Australia, they give advice on smartphones to medics in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Africa, India, and Pakistan. But the origins of this Arian Tally Heal charity came from working in Afghanistan, from trying to solve the problems of Afghans in the first place. It started in 2015, and now we're global. And we're considered one of the pioneers in telemedicine that the world is benefiting from. And the National Health Service is benefiting from it, and so does the World Health Organization. So of course we have to help refugees out of compassion and out of fulfilling the human rights. But I think we need to start thinking of refugees slightly differently. We need to look at them as an investment, not just a donation, but an investment in their talents, in their diversity, and the skills, and also the unique problem-solving thinking that they bring to the table that will contribute to the countries, not only their host countries, but the regional countries and the world at large. Now, the pandemic has shown to us and has proven to us that our humanitarian problems and the disasters, we share them all together. It's not a problem in one country or another, it's our collective problem. For example, even if we have a vaccine, if the virus is not tackled in refugee camps in low-resource countries, it will haunt us back in the UK, in the US, in all the developed countries. So helping actually refugees now can prevent future humanitarian disasters that will contribute to regional peace, connectivity, market building, and to the global innovation. So I'm simply actually asking here the panel and all the dignitaries here to consider seeing refugees more as actually the change makers, peacemakers on a national and international scale. But they do need your support right now. Thank you very much for having me again.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ariane, and what a tremendous message, and really a message that resonates when you think of the potential that is in Pakistan and Iran among the refugees, and my goodness, the millions inside of Afghanistan, where you have the tremendous potential and desire if they could just get that assistance. And I guess I keep feeling throughout everything is it's been 20 years, and I feel like there's a lot of this conversation sounds familiar, keeps being going on, but it's certainly important to hear. And this brings us to our next panelist, and the final one before we go back to the High Commissioner, Mr. Henry Karali, the World Bank Country Director for Afghanistan. The World Bank is, of course, hugely important to financial health of so many countries. Certainly, Afghanistan's financial health is certainly in need of a little bit of assistance. And some of the figures are somewhat disturbing in terms of the government itself able to come up with 25% of its budget. So much money lost to corruption, something like 19 billion. And I guess for the World Bank, it would be interesting, Mr. Karali, if you could discuss what interventions and focuses to assist in developing and assisting returning refugees, the economy in Afghanistan to make it a better situation for which they can return to.
Thank you very much, Kathy. And first of all, I'd like to start by acknowledging and expressing appreciation, particularly to Pakistan and Iran, who have assumed important roles in hosting and assisting refugees for all these decades, and also to Filippo Grandi and UNHCR for facilitating this event and for continued support to refugees around the world. I want to pay special tribute to the returnees and CSOs in this panel. Quite admirable what you've been doing, and an inspiration, not only for refugees, but I think beyond that, for all. Let me start by answering the question that Kathy, you've asked, in terms of the role of development, the role of the World Bank in development, and the role of the World Bank in supporting returnees. First of all, development solutions are essential if we are to ensure sustainable return and reintegration of Afghan refugees. These development solutions, if I can borrow a phrase from UNHCR, include investments in economic, social infrastructure, as well as in institutions and in human capital. Now, according to the IOM, as we heard earlier from Mr. Vitorino, a survey conducted in Afghanistan showed that one of the key drivers of migration is lack of livelihood and job opportunities. Therefore, for returnees to integrate sustainably, there needs to be opportunities for jobs and other forms of income generation. This requires the economy to be vibrant, to create enough jobs, not only for the returnees, but also for the entire community, as others have mentioned. Because if you single out returnees and not the community as a whole, you end up creating more friction and more conflict in this regard. Now, as far as the macro picture is concerned, let me say that the second Afghanistan National Peace and Development Framework, or ANPDF2, which the government has prepared for the conference next week, identifies agriculture as one of the greatest potentials for employment. In addition, Afghanistan will need investment, not only from donors, but also from the private sector. Investments in infrastructure, like roads, electricity, irrigation, communications, etc. Much of this has deteriorated over the past 4 decades, mainly due to conflict, but also due to lack of maintenance. There is also a need on the part of the government to ensure that there will be a business-friendly regulatory environment that encourages the private sector to invest and also encourages returnees to be able to bring back their skills and invest to support their communities and others in the country. This requires the enabling environment to be created, and it is the role of the government to do so. Now, the World Bank, with resources from the Afghanistan Reconstruction Trust Fund, that is supported by several donors, is financing several projects that are aimed at strengthening the enabling environment at the micro level for individuals, not only for the government, but for individuals, focusing on 13 cities that have experienced the highest rates of influx back to Afghanistan. The Easy Car project, Eshtegal Zayed Command Donor, is a $200 million project that helps provide short-term employment opportunities to improve market enabling infrastructure and implement investor-friendly regulatory reforms at the district level. The project is implemented in coordination with UNHCR's priority areas of return and reintegration, or PARS for short, where there is an overlap in geographic coverage, and also with IOM in the policy side. Now, also the IOM survey that I talked about earlier recognizes that insecurity, conflict, and violence have been key drivers of migration in Afghanistan. Inequality in access to resources and endowments such as land, water, often feed into conflicts. And this is particularly relevant for women who suffer the most with inequality in access to these resources. Increased exposure to risks and vulnerability due to natural disasters like floods, like droughts, compound all of these problems that we have. In order for a population to have more equal and fair access to resources, we need to be able to protect them from natural disasters and also provide effective development planning and administration of resources. I'm sure that the Deputy Governor in Bamiyan knows very much what I'm talking about, being able to provide a well-coordinated framework for support to be delivered to communities. The ARTF, the Afghanistan Reconstruction Trust Fund, also finances a number of projects, in particular the Citizens Charter, that is aimed at improving the delivery of core infrastructure at district level and also strengthening community level participation in development. This provides, for example, cash for work assistance to displaced households and also to host communities. It also provides matching grants for communities to be able to start up businesses and to make further investments at the local levels. Now, to support community integration, we apply inclusive and participatory processes to help strengthen the social inclusion and cohesion. Now, this work cannot be done by ourselves alone. We work with the government, we work with the communities, and we also work with the UN agencies to make sure that this support reaches all parts of the country. Finally, to conclude, these investments towards creating an enabling environment and opportunities need to be matched by investments in human capital. Dr. Wahid Arian mentioned the need for supporting people with the skills to come back. This kind of strengthening of skills by the host countries in particular is quite important. And we recognize this. And for this reason, we also on this side of the border support investments in schools, in health facilities, in hygiene, in water, and so on and so forth. I want to conclude by reassuring Afghanistan and on behalf of my colleagues in Pakistan, also on behalf of my counterpart in Pakistan, that the World Bank will remain committed to continue supporting both Afghanistan and Pakistan, and of course, other countries as well, to ensure that we provide the right resources for strengthening development and also for providing resources for reintegrating refugees and supporting development as a whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Karali. And this concludes our panel discussion. And I would like to say thank you so much to all our panelists. And I'd also like to, oh, no, I'm not muted. Sorry, it said I was muted. Or maybe that was just wishful thinking on their part. But anyway, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone. I would also like to speak to a couple of things as we wrap up. Everyone made so many good points. I think it's really significant that here we are 20 years on. I think from many Afghans that I've spoken to, and that is that there is a great sense of frustration that 20 years on, that the beginnings of a change is not really evident. The law and order situation, some real challenges that are independent of security, but security also a huge issue. So I think this is all hugely important, and I think I really have such respect for the UNHCR and everything that it's doing, and understand the great challenges that everybody faces going forward. And I guess I just want to make the point of that the thinking outside of the box, and to try to understand that it can't be sort of business as usual if things are really going to change. And with that, I'm going to introduce a final segment, and that's a video statement by Zalmay Khalilzad, Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad, who is the U.S. Special Representative for Afghanistan Reconciliation. And Ambassador Khalilzad was the negotiator of the deal that has led to the peace talks, or the intra-Afghan negotiations going on now, and on which so much hope is pinned by Afghans.
Thank you very much, Kathy. I would like to thank High Commissioner Filippo Grandi, my friend, and UNHCR for holding this important event, and for the good work that it does in support of the refugees around the world. I'm sorry that I can't be there in person, but I'm delighted to have this opportunity. I would like to update you on the Afghan peace process, and that the United States has been pursuing for the last 2 years. We look forward to a long-term friendship with Afghanistan, and an Afghanistan that is at peace with itself and its neighbors, is a democracy, and an Afghanistan that respects the rights of all its citizens and moves forward based on the achievements of the last 2 decades. These goals have inspired our engagement and support of Afghan peace for the last 2 years. We have worked with the Afghan government and the Taliban as well as Afghan civil society. and different political leaders of the country. Similarly, we have worked hard with Afghanistan's neighbors and the international community to build support for Afghan peace and to reduce opportunities for spoiling behavior. As you all know, the United States and the Taliban signed an agreement February this year, and the same day we had a joint statement between the United States and our allies and Afghanistan that reinstated our commitment to the government and the people of Afghanistan. Since then, for the first time in 40 years of war in Afghanistan, the delegation representing the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan has been meeting. The meeting started on September 12th with the representatives of the Taliban to agree on a roadmap for Afghanistan's political future that will end this long war. I know that the people of Afghanistan are yearning for peace, and peace also provides great opportunities for the region in terms of connectivity, in terms of trade and development. We look forward to progress in the talks between the two sides. In fact, progress has been made in recent days, and we're looking forward to good news on rules and procedures that they have been discussing in the coming days. At the same time, we're working hard with the parties to reduce the level of violence, which has been too high. Too many Afghans are dying. We would like to that level of violence to come down and for a ceasefire to be agreed to as soon as possible. Peace is not easy to agree to. The terms are complicated. There is a long history of war. While progress is there, it's not going to be a smooth path forward. There are going to be setbacks. But among the alternatives available to the people of Afghanistan and to those who wish Afghanistan well, working for a peace agreement is the best option available. When peace comes, with the developments regarding regional connectivity and trade, and our commitment to work with Afghans for economic development and for a sustained cooperative relationship, Afghanistan can be a place where refugees can return with dignity, obviously voluntarily, and in a way that is safe and sustainable. Again, would like to thank you for this opportunity to send this message to you and appreciate the work that UNHCR has been doing and will do in the future. Thank you very much.
I hand the floor over to the High Commissioner, Mr. Grandi. I just wanted to, they weren't invited to the table, but there was a statement, surprisingly, today from the Taliban on international aid and the head of the conference. So I just thought to mention so that it is inclusive, and given that the talks are on, they did issue a statement calling for assistance and asking for assistance, the need for assistance directly to the people and not through any specific administration, except of course for theirs. So I will turn the floor over now to the High Commissioner, Mr. Grandi. Please, it's with you.
On this note, Kathy, yes, thank you very much. And it was good anyway to hear Ambassador Khalilzad's good positive statement. I think, we always have a duty to remain engaged and optimistic. I want to, first of all, once again, deep apologies for having dropped out. I don't know what happened. I hope it doesn't happen again. If it does, let me thank everybody ahead of my brief remarks for the excellent contributions that you have made to this high-level consultation. And I think, you know, I have not been able to hear all of them, but most. And really, you know, listening to Latifa, whom I had the pleasure to meet in Bamiyan just a few days ago, listening to Dr. Wahid, this is what somehow maybe we shouldn't have the conference. We should simply listen to Afghan people talk about what they think and what they need. And this should guide our way forward, as opposed to always try to put together frameworks that do not happen. But anyway, this is just you know, out of my heart. The other thing I wanted to say, a more somber point, which I was trying to make when I spoke. Things are not going well in the country. Things are not going well. You know, I spent 5 days this week. I spoke to a lot of people that I know, that I don't know, in different parts of the country. I was able to go to Bamiyan, to Parwan, in Kabul itself, in spite of the difficulties in contact that we have now because of security. I was able to speak, and people are very concerned, what will happen, as I was saying earlier, to women's rights, to the relative progress, it's not yet all there, that has been made in the past 19 years. What will happen to girls in schools? What will happen more, you know, more than anything else is what will happen to security. The fact that the US-Taliban agreement has prevented attacks on foreign troops doesn't mean that Afghans are not attacked every day. Every day they suffer casualties, and people are afraid. Women are afraid to walk after a certain hour of the day, etc., etc. This has to change in order for, you know, to do whatever, all that we have said this morning that we should do. And I think, as I said, Ambassador Khalilzad's statement is very important, convey the sense of, let's say, of way forward, if not of optimism. And I think that we need to really invest to the maximum extent in that direction. I would also say, because it is always possible in Afghanistan, and this is where I got cut, it is important, and here I'm talking to the EU, to the UK, to others, the donor representatives that have spoken. Let's keep in mind that we should keep open, regrettably, but realistically, the option that we will need more humanitarian assistance, because we may have to deliver that assistance in very difficult circumstances, from the security point of view, from the logistical point of view, in the midst of a pandemic. So I think we need to, the conference needs to have a big footnote on that much as we plan for the good scenario, the bad scenario may also continue to develop as it has been developing lately. Now let's move to the good scenario. And I don't want to repeat all that has been said. I have, from the perspective of my organization, and as a wrap-up, a few directions to indicate. First of all, several have mentioned, especially the World Bank, the priority areas of return. This is a good concept. What is this concept? The government identifies area, they've identified 20. We agreed in the last few days that we will go up to 35 next year, which is good, all over the country, to attract investments. These are areas likely to see a return if the scenario improves. And Kathy, this is the difference with before, with the lack of sustainability. When I coordinated the Afghan return in 2002 and 3, we only gave them the bare minimum to the returnees to survive for the first few months. Now, the concept of priority areas of return, and I saw one in Bamiyan, I saw one in Parwan, is much more comprehensive. It's investments in education, in employment, and I think it is good. Now, these priorities area of return need, as was mentioned by the World Bank, to be projects conducted in great consultation with people that are already there, with the local communities, to identify what their priorities are, and of course also with potential returnees. So consultation, as Lisa mentioned, consultation with communities are very, very important. There has to be a clearer link, perhaps, between the peace discussions and these projects, as many other projects, but certainly I'm talking now from the perspective of returnees. And then we also have to ask ourselves the question, what if people don't return. You know, I'm not a big believer that people will return in big numbers, even if peace prevails. It will be gradual. People have learned their lessons. But I think that in any case, these will not be wasted investments. This is why I'm really encouraging all donors, all governments, international financial institutions, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank. I was delighted to hear from Henriette Geiger that this can be linked to the European Pact on Migration and Asylum, because that pact, I know, has an external window that applies very well to Afghanistan. As Antonio Vitorino said, a great majority of the arrivals in Greece are Afghans today. So in order to prevent that from growing, and it might, we need to make investments to address the root causes of these movements. So that's a model that we want to propose. We'll talk about it in the conference. We think it's a good model. The other big track is the IDPs. I've raised this with the president, with the vice president, with various ministers. You know, there is new legislation that the government is enacting, especially on land. This is key because most of the IDP situations suffer from a lack of availability of land and other resources. I am almost convinced that a majority of these millions of IDPs will not go back home. So the government will have to find solutions for them where they are displaced. You need to turn them from IDPs to members of new communities. So you have to invest in those communities to address the IDP situation. And there, on the legislative policy front and on the operational front, we need to make progress. There's no point in addressing only the refugee situation if you don't look at the internal refugees that at this point are very often, as President Ghani told me the other day, in much worse situation than the refugees themselves. And of course, as we do these two things, invest in priority areas of return and IDPs, not forget that Iran and Pakistan need more support. And this is something that I really want to stress very much. This conference is about Afghanistan. I think both Iran and Pakistan will be happy that we look strategically at investments in the country of origin of the refugees. But meanwhile, they have to continue to bear the burden. Iran is in a very difficult economic situation for the reasons that we all know. They need help on the humanitarian front. Pakistan has hosted for so long the same on their side. So we need to do that. Finally, two important points before I close, Kathy. One is President Ghani said something very important in his statement, and this is something that he and I discussed last Monday. He called it, as usual, very eloquently, the reconceptualization of the diaspora. Meaning, and some of you, I think, said it, I think Dr. Wahid said best, we need to move away from, now, if I say that, everybody will jump on me. I'm the High Commissioner for Refugees. We need to move away from the refugee framework, pure and simple. We need to look at this diaspora as an opportunity in so many different ways. And I think that we need, you know, and Antonio Vitorino, I hope, is still online. Yes, he is. We need to work together, Antonio, on this, on reconceptualizing this. Many people in Iran and Afghanistan may not want to go back, but still they may contribute to the future of Afghanistan. And the same, and even more so perhaps, people like Dr. Wahid, who are further away and who have acquired skills and could be useful in different ways to the reconstruction of the country. But this requires a lot of work. Conceptual, because we have to be careful that in doing so, we don't lose the protection element. You know, there are people who simply cannot go back to Afghanistan for protection reasons. These are essentially the refugees. So the role of UNHCR is still important there. But then let's look at other things. You know, Pakistan, Iran, and Afghanistan have been working now for a couple of years on issuing Afghan documents to people in Iran and Pakistan with the help of the World Bank and others. This is very important because if we turn these refugees into people with documents that protect them as much as the refugee framework does, even more perhaps, and can move back and forth, then, you know, they will fulfill an important function both in the countries of asylum and in Afghanistan itself. And you turn this complex war-generated movement of refugees into a managed economic migration framework that is beneficial to the economy of the entire region. This, of course, requires also investments both in the region and beyond, in talent, in return of talent, all things that IOM is much more experienced than UNHCR in doing. And of course, we must partner with the World Bank and others. But I really would like to launch a challenge here. Let's reflect on that, because if things progress positively in Afghanistan, if they don't, this is impossible. But if they do, we must reconceptualize the diaspora, as President Ghani said earlier. And finally, very finally, you know, when I was in Kabul in the last few days, I had very good discussions on all these issues with the president, vice president, foreign minister, and others. And I think that what has been put in place in Afghanistan, what is being put in place by the government in terms of coordination of all these efforts is good and positive. And that is also very important, because it's not just the Ministry of Refugees and Repatriation, as in the past, doing all the work, trying to organize all this, but it is an interministerial effort across the board that will take charge of these complex challenges: humanitarian assistance, disaster management, all the way to this reconceptualization that will require investments intellectually on the part of the Afghan government at the highest level. Just to say that, of course, UNHCR, I said it to open, has been 40 plus years with Afghans. It will continue to stay. There is strong commitment on our part. And in spite of all the challenges, a sense of hope, at least, that the current juncture will offer us some more sustainable option for solving finally this long-lasting and dramatic displacement problem. Thank you very much, Kathy.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner, and so many amazing points. And the really interesting as well is that coordination that is very different from what it was earlier. Certainly the involvement government, but I think also the whole, I think Afghans are so much an important part. And also, I think Afghans want that monitoring and accountability be a real priority as well. But on all of those wonderful notes, and thank you so much to everyone. I mean, it's just been kind of breathtaking. The knowledge, the ideas, the suggestions, and good luck to everybody, and going forward, and especially good luck to Afghans going forward. Thanks very much.